Hey friends, I'm Christy and you're listening to Rock the Damn Boat. If you've ever bitten your tongue to keep the peace or said yes when every part of you wanted to say no, this one's for you. We're diving into the messy real stuff that people pleasers like me have spent years avoiding. It's time to have the hard conversations, shake things up, and learn to stand tall, even when it makes waves. One of these days, I will have that intro memorized, but we are still new in our podcasting journey, and I'm excited because today I have my very first guest on the show. If you listened to last week's episode, you'll know that I talked a lot about the transformation happening in my business, and I have had some pretty deep soul sister conversations with my guest today. So of course it made the most sense for her to come on and talk about her own transformation and what her business journey has looked like and all the changes and pivot points. If you are watching, you might know who I am talking to, but for those of you listening, I am absolutely thrilled to bring on my friend Kelsey Powell, owner of the Lace Cactus. And we're going to talk about, business and transformation and what all of that looks like and how it's okay to change your mind and find pivot points. So with all that said, I am going to ask you, Kelsey, to tell us a little about yourself.
Yes, I'm super excited to be here. And Christy's right. We've had some really deep conversations, and I'm really excited for you guys to be in on one of those. I am Kelsey Powell, and I own the Lace Cactus, like she mentioned. And I also own Desert Bronze, self-tanning company. I have 3 kids, and they are 15, 12, and 3. And over the last couple of years, I've had the honor of being somewhat of a stay-at-home mom on my break from my business, which has been amazing, and I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And I have also been going through a lot of really huge changes in my own life, and so that has allowed me and Christy to really resonate with each other. So I'm really excited to be here and see where this takes us.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we're going to have a casual conversation. And if you're watching on YouTube, great. Don't be offended. We're not talking to you. We are talking to each other today and to our listeners. So, Kelsey, I would love to know, a lot of people know your story, but for those of them who don't, would love to hear, how did you get started with the Lace Cactus? What inspired you into that business?
So you had sent this question this morning because I asked for questions of some kind of preview, and it's really interesting because in hindsight, I really see it a lot differently than I did through the process. And I think that a lot of us, we come up with the idea and then we chase the idea. But that is not at all the approach that I took. And it really started off that I wanted to just bring additional income into my household. And we were living paycheck to paycheck and often had overdrawn bank account. And at the time, it was really just about bringing in more money into our home. And I've always been a creative person. And so I actually started off by making crafts, and I had seen a lot of people starting to sell on Facebook, and I started off just selling on Facebook Marketplace. And that money that I started to generate, I was able to then buy clothes. Now, I will add that as a child, I was always drawn to the clothing industry, but I didn't have this set dream in my head that I wanted to own a clothing company or anything like that. It really just unfolded that way. There was no goal. I really had no idea where I was going.
So I'm curious, like you talk about clothing, and it was funny. I think I might have told you this, but when I was about 12 or 13, I sketched out a magazine. Like I was obsessed with 17 magazine and all of those fashion magazines, and Spuds MacKenzie was the Target whatever mascot at that point. And so I drew this like bull terrier. So it was a dog model, but then I had this whole spread,
I
like
love it.
15 pages of her in all these different outfits. So you talk about wanting, like, liking clothing. Was there something, was it some, like, an actress on TV or just magazines that made you kind of get into that obsession, or somebody
That's a
was a
good
style
question.
icon?
So I also was very obsessed with 17 magazine. Teen Vogue was probably one of my
Okay.
biggest inspirations. And I was just always kind of a fashionista growing up. And I definitely dressed differently than I would say most of the people that I went to school with. Like we live in a really small town, population like 1,200, and I vividly remember I had got some. I hope I say this right. It's like Stuart Wetzman, I think.
Oh,
Okay, I found a pair of red polka dot heels at a thrift store, and I wore those with a coconut purse to school. And like that's just what I was very into fashion and in my own little world. And I love to sew.
yeah.
So I would make my own clothes. And
Oh, very
we
cool.
were constantly going to garage sales and thrift stores. So even though we didn't I didn't grow up with money, and but nobody would have ever known because I was really great at shopping.
Wonderful,
So,
yeah.
but I always loved clothes.
That
so.
makes me think of Pretty in Pink. Molly Ringwald's character would always go to the thrift stores, but then turn it into something
Yes, I love
magical.
it.
So
Yes.
that was actually another huge inspiration for me in terms of like the way she designed things. So
Yes, I love
very
that.
good. Okay, so you were always had an interest in clothing,
Mhm.
and you took these amazing creative ideas and went from designs and into clothing. I'm fascinated by that because I had never asked you. I knew you had a huge presence on Instagram, but I had never asked you about the original. So Facebook Marketplace,
Mhm.
that's incredible. And especially because it's still such a big platform for people to
Right.
buy on today. I always think about it more of like used furniture and things. So that's cool that you were
Yes.
getting an audience with design.
Well, it was
And
actually, so I want to add to that because it was, I would take things like this table sitting here, and I would still go to garage sales and thrift stores or what people would give me because I had no money to start with. So I couldn't just go out and buy things. I would just revamp what I already had. And so it was actually furniture, and like picture frames was a big one, and I just utilized what I had. So when people ask, when they talk about, the thinking that they need a large sum of money to start something, I quite literally started with nothing.
yeah, so
So
like upcycling before we were really using the
right,
term upcycling.
yes, exactly, exactly,
Awesome, putting your own creative spin on it.
yes.
When did you get into Instagram, or was that a big part? Because like I said, I know you have a huge platform on Instagram. So was that when it started sort of offering that as a shopping platform?
So I actually started off on Facebook, and that would have been about 2011. And I started off there, and it was a few years later because I started realizing like maybe I don't want all of my eggs in one basket.
Mm,
There was a little fear there. And so we did not start our Instagram page until later on. And so our Facebook has always been our primary source of sales.
okay.
Our following on there has always been much bigger. And then we kind of just utilize that to get people to then go follow us on Instagram. So we really didn't utilize Instagram in the way that we could have, I would say, because there was definitely a lot of potential there that we didn't tap into. And so we really honestly poured into Facebook a lot. But then when those two kind of came together with Meta, that allowed us to, it was kind of doing it itself, because they were tied together. So the ads were kind of running on both.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I don't want to go too far off on a tangent. We'll get back to your story, but I do think that's an interesting nugget for people to understand, because you hear a lot about sticking with one platform. Like,
Mhm.
pick what you know, pick what you're comfortable with. I am not on TikTok. I don't have plans to be on TikTok. I know Pinterest can be a big one, but
Mhm.
I sort of don't understand. I have not taken the time to learn how to really effectively use Pinterest. So I'm the same way. I love Instagram. I love the visuals. Now it's gotten more into content like reels, so it's evolving. But I think that's incredible to me that you built such a strong foundation there that has sustained your business, because I want people to not feel like they have to understand how to do content on 10 different platforms. It's just not sustainable.
No,
none of us have the energy for that.
I definitely agree. And I know a lot of people, they will really kind of disperse, and it could pay off really well. And that strategy works great for a lot of people to disperse their say funding for advertisement and just energy and effort into a bunch of different platforms. But for us, we usually just poured straight into Facebook, and it paid off.
Yeah. And you were how old when you started this business?
I was 19.
19 years old. In terms of what it means to rock the damn boat, you chose entrepreneurial life right out of the gate. So at that age, whatever age that was, that is a time where young people are having to decide, like, do I go to college? Is that an expectation of my family, as it was for me? Like, nobody in my family had finished college, so there was certainly this, I won't say pressure, but just this path that had been paved out for me. Yes, we would love for you to go to college and get a career. And for you, that looked different. So if you look at that fork in the road for most people, what took you entrepreneurial direction? Did you know entrepreneurs? Did you have a role model, or you're just like, hey, like you said, you've got to make money and this is how to do it?
So my grandparents, they were absolutely the entrepreneurial, I feel like, role model in my life. So they owned multiple businesses downtown.
Oh, cool.
And I grew up going down there after school and spending a lot of my time in the summer there. And my dad, he's an incredible salesman. So then I have that in my favor too. And when I was as young as 7, I was already coming up with business ideas and writing them in journals. I still have them. And some of them are like restaurants. It's all sorts of things. And so I think that for myself, I always knew I would be an entrepreneur, but it's really interesting. And I think this is just proof of how everything is always working out the way that it is meant to. Because when I was 18, let me back up a little bit. When I was 16, I moved to Missouri, and I moved in with my dad. And so my intention was to come back and go to college here in Texas, because it's who I thought I was supposed to be. All my friends were going to go to college. My sister, she went to college, my cousin, and I don't have a big family. So it just felt like that was what I was supposed to do. And that was kind of what we were taught too. And if you want to be successful, go to college. At the time it was. So for myself, I kind of dropped the ball on applying. And so it didn't work out. And then I actually got pregnant at 18. And so really at that point in my life, I looked like a failure, and I felt like a failure. I was a teen mom, and I didn't go to college, and I was working a minimum wage job that I was absolutely terrible at. I was a horrible employee. Was always calling in sick. And I think it was after I had my daughter, and I was working at a fabric store, and I think there was always this voice in my head that was like, your creativity alone could make 5 times what you're making here an hour. So then I never felt that pressure to just be this outstanding employee, because something in me always knew that I was going to outgrow that, and it would be soon. And so when I was 19, I returned back to work after I'd had my daughter, and worked at a fabric store. And this actually really started off, I started making hair bows for my daughter. So I started a page, and this was before the lace cactus, and it was called like Tickled Pink Boutique. And I wanted to sell hair bows off of my Facebook page. And from there, that's when I then started making crafts. I ended up leaving that job, and it just took off overnight. So I've always known I would be an entrepreneur. I never and even I never had it in me to even imagine really being an employee. It was always just kind of, I don't know, felt like what I was supposed to do.
Yeah,
You know, I
I
don't know.
love that. I love that because you had that voice early on.
Mhm.
You listened to that voice. And for some of us, like me for sure, I won't, it's not like I was consciously aware that I was people pleasing, but
Mhm.
a lot of my listeners, like that's what we're talking about is like kind of rocking the damn boat because we've been people pleasers. And I saw this path laid out for me of college and a career, and I had worked in retail in high school and then also in college. So I did enjoy the creative aspect of retail. So I think that's why then I built an entire career out of it, which
Mhm.
has been a very lucrative and enjoyable career up until recently when I left. But I think back to that girl that drew that whole magazine, and somewhere along the way, she got like stuffed in a box for me.
Yeah.
And I think because I wasn't aligned with what I knew I truly wanted to do, like that's where alcohol came into play for me and becoming a
Mm-hmm.
heavy drinker because I just felt this discontent. And I love the Kathy Heller podcast, and she was talking recently about it's this incongruence with who you are and what you're who you are in your life, what labels and roles you play versus who you really wanted to be, and that always causes discontent. And I'm not getting any of that exactly right, but I think for me that was just always this awareness that I was doing a very practical role in my life, and sure, having a steady paycheck is great, but I just never, at some point I kind of shut down all of that, like writing and creativity. And so I mean, we love each other as friends, and I admire you for doing that, following those creative pursuits. So we've talked a little bit about you started the bow business, and then you got into the lace cactus, and you have a storefront here in Heiko. And how long have you had that space?
2014? I think that sounds right.
Okay.
Yeah, 2014.
So
So it's
about
a
10
couple years.
years.
Yeah, a few
Yeah.
years in, then I got that. I opened that up.
Yeah.
And then shortly after we opened a warehouse because it had really taken off online.
Yeah. So you
And
had the
so,
Facebook business and the storefront. What was it like in the early days, kind of from your business mindset?
mhm.
And we could go ahead and jump into what that looks like today. I mean, so we're talking about sort of the 10-year period
Okay.
between you have storefront and you have e-commerce. And then today, I know you're feeling a little bit differently about the business. So walk us through the transformation of the last decade.
Okay, I'm going to get a sip of my drink before I reply to this
Yeah.
one. Because this is a big answer.
I know.
I think I know what you mean, but more about how I feel about it or how my mindset towards it,
So
how I operate.
I know you, and our listeners don't. So I know that you hit a point of real burnout in the business. So maybe I'll just stop dancing around it, and I'll
Yeah,
just
let's
say,
get right
okay,
to
here's
it.
what happened. So okay,
Ah.
so you start the business, you're in a flow, you're
Mhm.
doing what you love. It is, from what I understand, it really started to consume you in a lot of
Mhm.
ways.
Yes.
So maybe a little vulnerability around,
Oh, I'm all about it.
what that was like in the early days, and then how you started to feel that shift, that it was.
So, okay. In the early days, I very much was, like I mentioned, in this just kind of flow. I never overthought anything. I never set any. I'm not going to say I didn't set goals for myself because I did. And I did have an incredible pressure on myself to succeed. And I always have, always. I've always been a very high achiever, mostly in my adult years. I don't know so much. No, that's not true. I've always been. And I've always really chased my own worth through my performance, very high perfectionism, extremely, and always have. And so in the beginning days, I I was really kind of just going through, I was working incredibly hard, very much in the hustle culture, and really stayed there, but it always came easy. I'm the one that made it hard. To be really honest, those sales were never difficult. They always were easy, and growth was easy, and coming up with new ideas and making changes, and all of it was always easy, and it felt like easy money. I mean, I absolutely loved what I did. It was no problem to sleep 3 hours and then work the remaining 21 every day. I did not care. I loved it. I was obsessed with it. And I hated the weekends, because that was when my work life would slow down. I could not wait for Monday. And I was in control of all of this. I was my own boss, and I was my best employee because I would do anything in the world. There was not a single holiday, there was not a single birthday that I did not work. And I know that sounds as bad as it was. And I was fully consumed with working, and everything in the process was sacrificed at that. And so when 2022 came along, and I had my daughter in February. In about March, so my daughter had colic, and then I had some issues with some of my like main employees at the time, and everything kind of started to get difficult, and then it got more difficult and more difficult, and what came easy all of a sudden became very, very hard. And so, mind you, this is pre-healing, pre-burnout. This is when the burnout is really starting to develop. So this is making me go face to face with my perfectionism, chasing my worth, because now my worth is in question because the sales are not coming. And it felt like my whole world was falling apart. And for anyone listening, this is not just in regards to, that sounds so materialistic to say, like, well, the money stopped coming. It had nothing to do with money. It actually was the performance of myself. I felt like a failure. And and there was so much more going on in my life than just the lack of sales. There was this period of time. I also began my process of divorce, and at the time we have a baby, and pretty much anything that could go wrong was going wrong in my life, and it felt like my life was on fire. And so I poured myself into work, and I was working well over 100 hours every week, not sleeping, not eating, losing weight like crazy, and not taking care of myself. And right before Thanksgiving, this would have been 3 years ago, I was actually care flighted for a severe panic attack, and they were concerned I was having a heart attack.
Oh,
so they care
gosh.
flighted me to Dallas. And that was a big wake-up call for me. It was really terrifying, but it was triggered by lack of sleep, lack of eating. I was preparing for Black Friday, and I think the biggest wake-up call was all that I poured into that, and the Black Friday ended up being the worst one I'd ever had. And so it was about May, and I had come home from a work trip. We were doing a week-long photo shoot, and I sat down, and that was the point. Like, I never sat, I always ran. And I sat down on my porch, and I grabbed my computer, and I don't know what provoked me to do this, but I just started typing, and I asked myself a question, and it said, "What is stressing you?" And that question changed my entire life.
Wow.
And that week, I told everyone at work I was taking a break. Mind you, never taken a single day off. And I've had a broken rib with pneumonia and still work. So
Oh my gosh.
for me to say I'm taking a break was huge. I was so burnt out. I'm still on it, technically.
Yeah.
And that was 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, not quite, because it was May of 2023. Where I am now it could not be more different
Yeah.
in every aspect.
Well, I have a couple of things I want to, kind of probe a little deeper on maybe about what you said. And it's interesting because I was thinking about, I met you, I think it was right around this time in 2023. It was
Mm-hmm.
because I had signed the lease for the studio in November of 2023. Our friend Holly insisted that I meet you, and boy, was she right.
Yes.
So we started, connecting to some degree, but now that we're both here in this very transformational period, I think that's what's bringing us together even more. But you mentioned, okay, so you got care flighted to Dallas, and up until that point, was there anything that anyone was saying to you, or like, hey, I'm worried about you, or were there any maybe indicators that could have I'm not saying could have prevented that, because I think for a lot of people that's probably they ignore the signs of burnout until they're in a very extreme situation like that. But was there anyone around you that was like, hey, you're doing a lot, or you're it's probably that nobody could have said anything that would have made you feel
No,
any
they
different.
couldn't. No. I think that even if someone had approached me and said, hey, I'm worried about you, you need to slow down, that would have been them going up against piles of trauma and piles of childhood wiring and piles of everything that had ever happened that built me into having that perfectionism to begin with.
Yeah.
It's not as simple. And I think that that's really an important message, because oftentimes we will go to someone and say, hey, I'm concerned about you, or hey, you need to change. And it's not that simple. And people take that very personally, and they believe that, well, they don't care about me. They're not changing. And I've dealt with that. My dad has struggled with addiction my entire life. And I've never felt that way towards him. I've never thought, well, if you can't change, you must not love me, because I've always understood that I'm going up against something that is so much bigger than me. And as much as my dad loves me, in that moment, it's not about competition with an addiction. It's about, you are going up against their entire life, and what is wired into them, that's been wired into them from childhood. And it has nothing, and sadly it has nothing to do with the other person. It doesn't.
Yeah.
And it's taken very personal, but it's not personal.
Yes. You bring up a great point, because I was the same way with my drinking. When I was in the throes of my drinking, it wasn't until I chose to get well that I did meetings, and I started on this very serious path. But you're right. We learn the same thing in recovery, that you can't help someone. They have to help themselves. And so there becomes a point where you gain that self-awareness. And for you, that was writing that, what's stressing you out. And it's, it's unfortunate that we do have those behaviors that just keep us trapped. But you're right, it's trauma too. I mean, I had the same level of perfectionism that drove me in my career, so totally different, career paths, but same thing, trying to always, win the attention and validation of a promotion. And what did that look like in my career, where it was always getting promoted? And I was chasing, climbing the corporate ladder, so to speak, for a long time. And like I said, yours was, workaholism. Mine was alcoholism, isms in some ways. So, all right. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to spend a little time talking about, maybe I'll tee it up this way. I have been talking about my corporate exit. I knew that something needed to change for me in how I found purpose and was fulfilled in my own life, and stop living for other people, which is how my corporate job started, and kind of this well laid out path. I also unexpectedly decided to close my yoga studio, which is where we're sitting today, and I I realized I couldn't renew the lease. It just is not bringing in. I've got to figure out different ways to pay the bills, pay myself. But I'm excited about everything that's coming. And I know that I'm listening to a calling around coaching and helping others on a bigger platform than, I loved my team that I was coaching at work, but it was, a team of 5. And I love this yoga studio, but we're in a small market. And so I'm feeling called to talk to people on a grander scale. And unfortunately, the yoga studio is falling away with that. And so you talked about, your life burning down around you. And I feel very much that way right now. Like, okay, we've the corporate job, we sold the Hamilton property, the yoga studio is closing, I'm closing my booth at the Mercantile, like literally stripping everything away. And then not having a clear path ahead, I am at peace with that. And those are the conversations you and I have been having. I think, what's kind of driving you right now as you think about what comes next?
Faith, honestly, faith, a knowing, a deep knowing that although I cannot see where I'm going, I know that I'm headed in the right direction. And I have so much in my life that is just confirmation to that. I just spoke on my beginning days of the lace cactus. I had no idea where I was going. And that is such a great example. And who I am now is obviously a completely different person than who I was at 19. And I think that's one thing that, if I sat down and I told someone, hey, I own this, company that it was making millions and it was really successful online and we've won these awards and whatever. And if I told them that I walked away from that, and even old me would have said, why don't you just work harder? Why don't you just rethink, go at it a different way and just pour more of yourself into it. And so that in itself is probably one of the biggest changes. I have completely broken up with the hustle culture.
And what are some of the things that you're thinking about as you decide what's next for you, and making peace with that transformation? I think knowing that I never saw the studio being forever, but I didn't, but it can't help but feel like a failure because it was only 2 years, but those 2 years served a big purpose. And then, we get caught up in what we think everything's going to look like. And now, when you get to that point of like, it's not forever, then, and maybe you tied that identity to it, but you and I are both at peace with what's coming next for us, even if we don't know what that is. So, maybe tell us a little about how you're walking through this evolution or this transformation.
So I mentioned that in my earlier days that I had no idea where I was going. And I didn't have this set vision of I want to own this huge clothing company and have all these employees and do all these big things. That was not at all the intention. I was taking each day by day. And it was my goals were very small. It was I want to add income to my household and I achieved that. And then it was the next step. Well, I would like to buy some clothes and then I would achieve that. And it was always just looking right in front of me. I never got in my head, I want to do these huge things. But what's interesting is as a child, I always had this dream and I was just obsessed with being rich like that. And that sounds so, but I was a child and I did grow up in poverty. And I think as a child, I looked out into the world and my perception was these people that are famous, looking at magazines, they're loved. They're really loved. And the world really accepts them and everything. Again, child's perception. And so I got exactly what I wanted. That was my manifestation. That was my prayer, however you want to say it. That was my goal, was to be rich, and I got that, and that is pretty much all I got. And so then along the way, around the time, I think internally I started craving peace. I started wanting more out of life, but it's not, it was, I wanted peace. I wanted happiness. I didn't want to feel the way that I felt anymore. And I had this image, I'm definitely going to cry.
It's powerful.
I just had this feeling maybe that I wanted to feel that I'd never felt. And it was, I wanted to be in the room with one of my children and just be present and just be at peace and not have my head thinking about working. And it was all just worth, I had been running my entire life and survival mode, trying to be who I thought the world wanted me to be, look in the way that I thought the world wanted me to look, really just trying to be as perfect as I possibly could. And anything that would take from that, it just felt so painful. And that's not, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that, a bad day in sales is making me not feel at peace with myself. And that this trying to feel my own worth through who I am to the world is taking from who I am for my children. And this was not some like realization that happened overnight. This really developed over the last 3 years, and I am absolutely still on this journey, and I know that I likely will be for the rest of my life. And I think that we all are. You have a sign up here, and I took a picture of it because it just talks about how we are always growing, we are always changing. And I think that is probably the biggest point in all of that was, there was so much more to life that I was meant to be and to live that I was not living, because I was just trying to feel my own worth by succeeding and making money and all of these things. And I think it was just coming face to face with myself and really digging deep into who have I been, because that's not who I'm meant to be. And, I think that if I were to tell someone that I willingly, without not trying to put an effort to keep it alive, I made the decision to walk away from a multi-million-dollar company that I built from the ground up at 19 in my garage, because I knew that it was no longer meant for me, that people would think, why would you do that? I think that the whole world, not the entire world, but most people, they think that what they want is this success and this money. And I had that, but it was all I had. And, this whole journey that I've been on over the last few years, it has allowed me to become who I'm meant to be. And I have everything that she did not have. And right now I'm not succeeding. I'm not doing big things. But I know where I'm going is where I'm meant to go. And this is going to we're definitely going to have to ask some more questions on this, because it's still like, well, what does that mean? So I don't know if you have anything on that you want to add, but I know what I'm trying to say here, and we're going to get there before this is over.
I think it's just, for me, like, I'm hearing this huge rock the damn boat moment. I mean, you're right. People would question why you'd walk away from that level of success, but those are also the same people who are not currently creating the priorities like you are now. And you have grown and healed from that. And I think it's, again, I can create parallels between being a workaholic and being an alcoholic, and because the perfectionist runs deep in both of those paths. I think that you a lot of what I have learned and what I try to share with others is that you have to do what's right for you. And so it doesn't matter what any of those people think. You are finding that joy and that presence and that time with your children and getting to enjoy this gorgeous historic home that you bought, and spending time there, and you're creating this sacred space for yourself with your kids, and for you that is priceless. And I think that the external validation is just never going to get us what we need. But you also can't always teach that. So you have to, like you've said before, you have to walk through these things. There's the saying, like you grow through what you go through. But I think that people hearing your story and your message of, spending so much time seeking external validation and then finally realizing that you have the power within you to choose what you want for your life, that's the message that people need to hear. And I love that you're willing to share that with us today. So
absolutely. In our life, we are always meant to be growing, evolving, and changing. And who you are at 19 is going to be different than who you are at 25, and it's going to be different than who you are at 35, and so on. So with that, our values are going to change, our wants are going to change, our circumstances, everything. And we're going to have to grow and evolve with that. And along the way, I had this feeling of I was craving peace. So I can tell you right now that if peace had shown up at my doorstep 3 years ago, I would have pushed it away. Absolutely, I wasn't ready for peace. That was not meant for me yet. I had to evolve. I had to change. Because at that point 3 years ago, if somebody said, tomorrow you should take the day off, and I want you to spend quality time with your family, and I want you to just sit and relax, I would have been crawling out of my skin. And not because I don't love my children, it was because I didn't love myself. And I would feel like I wasn't where I needed to be. And so if I have this internal craving of peace and more out of this life than just making money and just succeeding. So when I began to crave that again, I would have rejected it if it had shown up. So that's when the evolvement had to take place, the growth, the change. And so as my life had been crumbling and falling apart the year leading up to, okay, I need to take a break, that was all part of the process too. So I feel like when people's lives are really falling apart and things are not working the way they want them to, and their business is slowing down, the sales are slowing down, and now they need to close their storefront and all of these things, you can look at it. And it's so easy to do to label yourself, I'm a failure. Look at all the mistakes I made. Look at all the things I did wrong. What's wrong with me? This person's business is still thriving and succeeding. What am I doing wrong? And you can get caught in that. And so this growth that's supposed to take place, you're stunting it personally. Yes. You're not allowing it to come in and change. And because this is what's really important to say, that said I would have rejected peace. So what was going to have to take place for me to allow peace? And it's going to be a lot of changing internally. Well, I only know inside my own head. If I wanted peace and wanted to change, if it was that simple, I would just snap my fingers and I would be at peace. So it's not. So then your life, you're going to be faced with things that are going to be lessons, and they're going to be changes in your circumstances that are going to then provoke the change that's needed. And so we often look at these negative, bad things that we want to label it as that, but they're opportunities. Every single negative thing that is happening is always an opportunity for growth. And I think that a lot of people get stuck because they're so consumed with this narrative that they are a failure, that they never get to go higher than that. They're stuck there. And so I always look at life like this wave that's constantly rising. And with that wave, it has low points. But once you integrate that and allow the change to take place and have faith that you're going somewhere greater than you've been, but you have to allow it. And you need to incorporate that faith and trust that this is part of the process. You're not meant to stay in one place for the rest of your life. You're not, because the world is changing. Everything is changing around you. You cannot just stay put in one place forever. You have to grow, you have to change. And so I think that knowing that, and I can look back on my life, and every time that, and I really encourage others to do this too, because it has been such a powerful tool for my own personal growth and acceptance and faith, more than anything, is to map out a timeline of your life and these things in your head that you would tell someone, like, tell me about the hardest times in your life. Mark them on a timeline, and then tell me what came after. So, and with each of those in my own life, I can see it is exactly what I'm describing. It is this low point, and then it's this really high point, and it's like that power of the pain that you experience, it has the ability to be transmuted and become that growth that is going to be required for that next step of your life and where you're going.
So powerful. And I think about, there was a point where I finally believed this too shall pass was actually going to pass. But you're right. When you're in those painful moments, it's like, there could be nothing worse than this.
Right.
I love that idea. That is a beautiful idea for our listeners to take away is, you're right. Map out those hard points and then look at what came after. And it's that pain that you're going through is growth. It's cracking open. It is shedding the skin, which is can be painful for sure. My mind goes to a couple of conversations I've had with other business owners around here where they threw out all of these ideas. Well, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this to keep the studio open? I had tried them all. And you mentioned too, like, people were like, well, why don't you just work harder? And there is certainly can be a false belief that the harder you work, the more return you'll get on that. And to your point, it might be that it is time to let go because you have tried everything. Nothing is changing to drive that momentum forward or grow those sales, or in my case, grow that membership. And it's because you're meant for something different in the next chapter. You're meant to close this chapter and write a new one. And even if you don't know what any words on that page are going to look like, you just know that something has come to its natural end. And I know that that's going to happen for me. I know that's happening for you in the sense that you're spending more time being present and creating that value from within. And that is a beautiful place to be. I could go back to my 15-year-old self who was just in so much pain and literally journaled, I'm not worth it. And she had to go through the next few decades of a lot of ups and downs. And now here I am, and I met with my coach last week to talk about, because when I tell people what I'm doing next and I talk about coaching and development, I don't tend to mention writing. And I love to write. I've self-published a book. I want writing to be a bigger part, but I tend to minimize that because it may or may not generate income. And it's like, well, whatever. Like, I enjoy doing it. And she said, well, when you sit down to write, channel some authors that you really admire. And I didn't miss a beat. And I said, well, I admire me. And those words have never come out of my mouth. And when she sent the notes back, she said, there was your quantum leap. You said, I admire me. And I was stunned, but I felt that in every fiber of my being. And so, we get to that point where, sure, we have a lot of role models and people who inspire us, but we are also inspired by our own actions and the messages that we listen to that point us on the next, point us down a path, even if we have no idea where we're going. I saw recently a quote, Martin Luther King Jr., that was faith is taking the next step even when you can't see the staircase. So I just feel that way right now. I'm going back to my, one day at a time message of that I learned in recovery, but it applies in so many other aspects of our life. I'm like, well, we'll just take today as it comes. And well, I have so enjoyed this conversation. I feel like we're just, we're scratching the surface on our conversations and where these will go next. But
I agree.
I think that this has made a full circle and come to its natural end. And you've shared your wisdom with us, from being a 19-year-old entrepreneur starting out to now being a fully present mom who feels wonderful about herself from the inside out and is no longer chasing perfectionism. So I think those are all powerful ideas. I just look forward to seeing what comes next for you. I know our listeners will too, and I know that you're always there to be a sounding board for people who need your expertise and wisdom. So I'll love to see what comments we get, and maybe we can do a follow up with questions that we get coming out of this episode. And thank you so much for your time. Everybody can follow and subscribe on Apple or Spotify, and I will talk to you again soon.
Bye, guys.